start? So Stan and I want to thank all of you for sharing your Sunday with us. We're representing the Social Action Committee today. We're here to do the panel on abuse. This is a really important program that we're doing. But first, a little bit of information. Please turn off all your pagers and your phones if you haven't already done it. Everybody here is from the Temple, so you know where the restrooms are. I don't have to go over that. This is a really difficult topic, so if you feel you need to leave the room, don't hesitate. Somebody, if need be, will come out with you, but it's hard to digest all of this information, and it's a difficult thing to hear. So please save all the questions that you have until the end. Don't ask after each panelist, because we're going to have a Q&A when we're all together. And the questions that you have from one panelist to another may bring about another question you have. So at the end, all three panelists will be together and we'll answer them. Let me introduce our panelists that we have from the DA's office. We have Kristin McElroy. She is the Chief Deputy DA, Chief of Adult Special Victims and Child Abuse Prosecution Cases. Then we have from NOVA, Stephanie Shantz, speaking on Kristin's going to speak on child abuse. Stephanie Shantz is going to speak on human trafficking from NOVA. She's the Victim Advocate Coordinator. And then from A Woman's Place, we have Jasmine Craig speaking on domestic violence. She's Director of Prevention and Outreach. All of these agencies are right here in Bucks County. If you need help, to help get you help, and hopefully to prevent abuse. Today is a wonderful opportunity for all of you to understand what happens in your backyard. This quiet little secret that we have is called abuse. Domestic abuse, child abuse is atrocious. It's life-changing, it's altering. Stan and I have been involved with NOVA for the past 24 years as sexual assault counselors. Monday from 5 to 9 is my time to answer the phones and go to the hospital with rape victims. Holding someone's hand when they get that kit taken can take hours. And let me tell you, that person is being re-victimized again. It's terrible. So now it's time for the panel. So the first one is going to be Kristin, and Kristin is going to speak on from the DA's office on child abuse.
Thank you, Shelley, for the introduction. So again, my name is Kristin McElroy. I've been with the District Attorney's Office for a little over 12 years, and the whole time I've been with the office, I have been in the Special Victims Unit. So handling adult sex crimes, a lot of child abuse, child sexual abuse material cases, and human trafficking. So I've actually been working with Steph for a number of years, so we were both excited to be on the panel together. So I think I will start by maybe just talking about the life of a child abuse investigation, sort of how it comes to law enforcement's attention, and sort of get into the ultimate outcome. So the nice thing about the approach here in Bucks County is we work, the District Attorney's Office, NOVA as the victim advocates, and law enforcement really work as a team, especially in child abuse cases, where we sort of all come together, pool resources with children and youth to investigate these cases. A lot come in through Childline. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with that. I see some nodding heads, but this is it can be anonymous, or you can report or identify yourself any allegation of child abuse. So like all teachers, coaches, they're all mandated reporters, but anyone, like civilians, can make reports through Childline. It sort of gets centered through like a hub and then sort of splintered out to the counties. So any Childline that happened in Bucks County comes to the District Attorney's Office and to children and youth. And from there, it gets forwarded out to the local law enforcement department, whether Doylestown Township, Ben Salem Township, Bristol, wherever. And that sort of is usually the initiation of a criminal investigation. So this can be ranging from physical abuse, neglect, and sexual abuse. So the way that we generally handle these investigations is for a child who is 13 or under, they get interviewed at the Child's Advocacy Center, which is housed at Nova. And the purpose of that is, sort of as Shelley talked about, when an adult victim goes for their rape kit, they are re-victimized. When a kid is asked really detailed questions about what happened to them, there's a re-victimization, just sort of having to talk about it and really get into the details. But it's incredibly important from an investigative standpoint to know the details. To sort of ferret out what we think happened, the credibility of the child, and making sure that we then handle the investigation properly. So we interview the kids through the Child's Advocacy Center. So that way it is one interview with the kid and we get all the information that we need. And it's not like at a police department, which can be a little bit scary. And you're not being interviewed first by a children and youth worker and then by a detective and then a DA comes in. It's sort of one interview to gather all the information. So it's done by a trained forensic interviewer. It's very kid friendly and it's done in a non-leading way. So we're getting the information from the kid, but not giving them prompts. So this makes it a legally sound interview if it needs to be used in court down the line if you get to that point. So this interview gets scheduled and the forensic interviewer is alone in the room with the kid. Their parents can be present at Nova but are not watching the interview, assuming there are non-offending parents. Obviously, if the perpetrator, they're not going to be coming. And watching the interview live is a member of the Special Victims Unit in the DA's office, the children and youth worker, and the detective. So that way, if we think, I really wish she'd ask more about this or that, she takes a break during the interview, comes in and talks to the team, and then if we want a little bit more information about certain aspects, we can give that prompt and then she'll go back in, ask those questions and then wrap up the interview. We always give the kid the opportunity at the end if they want to meet the team, come into the room. I'd say it's probably about 50-50. Some kids want to come in, some don't. But that way that they can start to kind of feel comfortable with seeing law enforcement. Everyone sort of has their own sort of opinions on cops, detectives. I actually find we're really lucky here in Bucks County. Our detectives who work these cases are some of like the kindest men and women, and I think they really are passionate about these types of cases and are usually pretty great with the kids. I think when they're assigning which law enforcement member is going to be handling these cases, they kind of pick the right personalities. And so that is generally how these investigations on child abuse begin. So from there, you have the whole team together, and we sort of come up with the next step plans, often with the DA's office and law enforcement really working together on what things we want to do to now try to corroborate the kid. That is really always the goal in these cases, of what other types of evidence can we get to support what the kid is saying, so that A, ultimately, we can file criminal charges and give this kid justice, but B, have as strong of an investigation as possible so that hopefully this kid will never have to come to court to testify. The reality is that's really out of our control, but that's always the goal of how can we make this case as good as possible so that this kid doesn't have to come to court. I think one of the hardest things that we have to do in the DA's office is making these charging decisions. A lot of times we'll have a kid who comes forward and reports sexual abuse, and we really believe them, we find them really credible, but we're not able to do anything to corroborate the child. It's very common for there to be delayed disclosures where a kid is abused and they don't come forward right away, but maybe they're in school having some type of talk, possibly with Nova, and it triggers something. They tell a teacher, they tell a counselor, and that's how this child line comes about. So when it's an older allegation, physical evidence is not something you're going to be able to get. Sometimes families sort of confront the offender if they know him or her, which can then make it a little bit harder when the police go to interview them. Surprise is always the goal when law enforcement is going to be interviewing an offender. So I think one of the hardest things that we have to do in the DA's office is make these calls on, do we file charges or do we not? We always do it with, sitting down with the family, talking it out with them. I never say we leave it to them because I don't think that that's like a responsible decision. Sometimes something is so bad, we feel it really important that we do file charges, even if the family's a little bit worried about their child having to go through the court process. Or on the other side, they really want to make sure that charges are filed, but because of concerns with the child's maybe mental health or how it could affect them going through the process, we have to make those hard calls. But in cases where criminal charges are filed, we really try to do as much as we can to protect the kid through the process. We'll usually, prior to court, take them to the courthouse, let them see where they might have to testify. Criminally, there's 2 times that they might have to testify. The first is what's called a preliminary hearing. This is like an early stage in the criminal process where I call it the 51% standard, whereas trial is the 99 beyond a reasonable doubt. At this preliminary hearing, you just need to put on enough evidence to move the case forward. But unfortunately, that usually does mean the child does have to testify at this stage. So I always do my preps at the courthouse where they'll have to be. It's great if the judge is there in the back so they can sort of meet the judge. Never talking about the case in front of the judge. We have to be proper about, not being trying to influence the judge, but just so the judge can, the kid will feel a little bit more comfortable if they've got to see the judge, see that they're not as scary. I find, again, most of our judges are pretty nice when the kids are coming in to the courtroom about trying to keep things closed off as possible. But there's always this balance of, we want to be protecting the children, but defendants have a lot of constitutional rights, which is a good thing, but there's aspects that can be frustrating. So I imagine you would hope to think that if a kid's testifying, we can clear the courtroom. We legally can't, because courtrooms, there's a right for the public to observe criminal proceedings. With the exception of juvenile court, where the offender is a juvenile, those are closed. But if the offender is an adult, courtrooms are open. So reporters can be there, family members that are supporting the defendant can be there. So what I usually do is, I go around, if anyone's sitting in the courtroom, and ask them, do you mind leaving? I can't make you leave, but a kid's about to be coming in here, testifying, and they're nervous. 99% of people are decent, and are like, oh, of course, they might be there for their own criminal case, but it's a child that's coming into the courtroom. So usually people will step out, obviously not reporters. You can't ask them to leave. I know that because I once did, and they informed me that I'm not allowed to tell them. I didn't know that they were a reporter in my defense. They happily told me. But most people are pretty decent. Then I usually ask for another cop who's there for his criminal case to just stand at the door, and if people try to walk in, just tell them what's happening. Hey, a child's in there testifying, do you mind waiting out here? So we never make people leave, but we try to ask people, and I think most people are pretty decent. Again, this does mean, though, that the defendant and his attorney is in the courtroom, and the kid does have to face them. It's hard, but again, that right to confrontation in the Constitution is, embedded in our criminal justice system. So they do have to see their offender, identify them in court. So that interview at the CAC that I was mentioning, where everyone's sort of watching, it is recorded, but it is not enough at the preliminary hearing to just play that recording. And a lot of times parents ask that, why can't you just play this? You just ask my kid for an hour all these questions. It's that right to confrontation that the criminal defendant has. So their attorney has the right to then ask their own questions of the child. So after the preliminary hearing, the case then comes up to the main courthouse in Doylestown, right 10 minutes up the road. And again, if the case is going to trial, I always do my prep with the family in the courthouse. I show them the courtroom that they're going to be in. Sometimes they get to meet the judge. Sometimes I'll just, especially if I know a child's really nervous, I'll have us just go and sit in the court and just watch how the judge is with other people, just because that familiarity, I think, makes people a little bit more comfortable when they see the way judges interact. And again, I think most of our judges, when they see a child in the courtroom, are a little bit gentler. Sometimes they'll introduce themselves ahead of time, and it's all just to sort of make them feel a little bit more comfortable with the process. We in the DA's office are lucky. We have a therapy dog who is the DA's. He obviously goes home, or she goes home with somebody, but she is a great resource. We always ask the kids, do you like dogs? And Daisy will come in and introduce herself, and she'll sit with them while they're sort of waiting or for prep. And there's a great program called Roxy Readers that Steph just reminded me of. These are people that get their dogs trained and volunteer an hour increments, and will just bring their dogs to the courthouse. They're great. We love it when the Roxy Reader dogs come up, because it's sort of like a rotating dog an hour, and it's really nice. So they will also provide support. during criminal cases when we have children in the DA's office waiting.
It's great watching a child's anxiety go from here down the floor. They will literally lay on the floor with the dogs. And we're talking all kind of dogs, from small little frou-frou dogs to their biggest one is a Great Dane. You know, and some of them have special needs, so it's great when we have a child that comes in that has special needs because they can relate to the dog. It's fantastic.
It is cool what animals do for, like, just kind of giving them that mental, emotional break of being able to have the dog there, and sort of distance themselves from what's actually happening. Now, I would say more child abuse cases end in guilty pleas than in a trial, which is a good thing. Guilty plea obviously meaning the offender is taking responsibility for what they did and pleading guilty before a judge. You know, everything kind of comes with a balance of, if someone pleads guilty, it often means maybe we're giving them something. So maybe we're agreeing to a certain type of sentence that would be a little bit better if the case went to trial. You know, we make these decisions based on the evidence we have, what we think is in the best interest of the child, and sort of the background on the defendant of what we think is fair based on their background and any mitigation that their attorney is able to provide us. But so that is the general process of steps that, of how we handle these investigations. Again, always working sort of hand in hand with law enforcement, so the kid feels like that team support. So that's a lot of the cases that our unit, I think we're like 9 to 10 attorneys in the special victims unit. But another big one is what's called cyber tips, which this is child sexual abuse material. It's often referred to as child pornography. We're really trying to rebrand the name because, you know, pornography is something that's legal. There's nothing legal about children engaging in sex acts. So child sexual abuse material, there was actually a push to legislatively change the name that I think has sort of fallen through because politicians are politicians. But we still in our office try to call it child sexual abuse material. We're trying to educate our judge to call that not child pornography because that softens what it really is. So we handle a lot of these investigations. We have 3 of our county detectives who, it's not a full-time job, but they handle a lot of these cyber tips that come in. But this is where, like, sometimes it is a person who is, you know, watching this material, horrible. But other times there is a kid on the other end who might be communicating with a person or, you know, perhaps manufacturing images of themselves. And so this is where, you know, for the parents in the room, cell phones are one of the greatest inventions in terms of what it has done for our life, our convenience. We have everything in our hand, in our pocket at all times. But they are so wildly dangerous in what kids are getting themselves onto, and they are better at phone stuff than we adults are. So it's really important that you are up on phones and what's going on. You know, you see these kids who think they're talking to another kid, they maybe send some pictures, and then the exploitation occurs where send you more, or I'm gonna tell all your family. This is something that knows no bounds of like the type of kid. You have these really great A student, good kids, they just sort of get caught in like a rabbit hole. And for them, this is like the most devastating, worst thing that's ever happened to them, and causes so much psychological trauma. And they're afraid to tell their parents because again, they're like a good kid who just kind of got caught up in something that they shouldn't have. It's so important that they are comfortable telling an adult about it, and so that way it can be investigated. A lot of these individuals who are doing the exploitation are overseas, so it is not something from a law enforcement standpoint that can be criminally prosecuted, but we partner with HSI and the FBI. We have a great network with both of them, and they actually do make a report internationally. Do I think anything's really happening there? No, but it's still good to know that if there's a reporting procedure for that.
We did have a successful one where we had where my department helped. It occurred in England, and he was prosecuted in England, and our child actually testified via Zoom.
That is cool to hear.
Yes.
Yeah, it's you do see a lot in. Yeah, I didn't know England. That's interesting. You see something like certain, like Western Africa. There's a lot in like the Russia area that you see. It's very upsetting. But again, it really affects all types of kids. You know, and on that, as we're kind of looking at the time and wrap it up, all of this, like, you know, child abuse is, you know, not a topic that is fun to hear about and listen to. So we really appreciate you guys coming, especially during an Eagles game. But it's like. It's all throughout the county. It's in really nice areas like Doylestown and, you know, areas that are like, it doesn't know any socioeconomic, racial, religious, there's no boundaries. It affects everyone in the community. So we sort of all have to be vigilant and watchful for this. I supervise our interns in the office, and I often talk about pockets of crime. I'm like, you will see a lot of like financial crimes in this area, or DUIs, because there's not as much other stuff going on. A lot of drug activity here, but domestic violence and child abuse is everywhere. It's really, really sad. So it really just sort of takes making sure that you're communicating with children, that they feel comfortable. A lot of times it's not with their parents, but I have some friends who I'm like friendly with their children. They're like, I love that they have another adult they can talk to. If they don't want to tell me mom, that maybe they would come and tell you if anything was happening. So it's really good keeping those communications open so that kids have a safe person that they can talk to. School's obviously a great avenue if they have a teacher or a counselor, because all teachers are mandated reporters. But a child line, you don't have to be a mandated reporter to make a report. You can even make it anonymously if it's something where you didn't want your name attached to it. We certainly prefer when they're not anonymous so that law enforcement can interview the person who's reporting. However, depending on the circumstances, you can make an anonymous report to Childline. If you see something or just have some type of feeling, you can't be too vigilant when you're trying to protect children. So there's all the resources there.
But your name does remain confidential when it comes to the defendant is never told who made the report, as well as the victim and their family. So the only ones who would know are Childline that's based in Harrisburg, the DA's office and whatnot, because they're not allowed to show the reports anymore.
Yeah, so there's still an anonymousness even if you do put your name. It's not something that would be going out to the defense. But thank you for being here. I'll be here for the Q&A once everyone else on the panel is done. So thank you.
Okay, our next panelist is Stephanie Shantz from Nova, and she's going to speak on human trafficking.
So another heavy topic, so please take care of yourselves. It's not easy stuff to hear about, so if you need to leave, I won't be offended. So good afternoon, my name is Stephanie. I am the Victim Advocate Coordinator at Nova. We're the comprehensive victim service agency in the county. I've been with Nova for about 6.5 years now. I actually started off as a human trafficking advocate, so this topic is near and dear to my heart. And then prior to working at Nova, I worked about 5.5 years between Montgomery County Children and Youth and Bucks County Children and Youth. So going along with Kristin with like child abuse, like this has been in my life for quite a while working in this field. So just a little bit about Nova. So like I said, we're the victim service agency in the county. We do a multitude of different services. We offer free trauma counseling, free advocacy services. So a lot of the cases that Kristin was talking about that's going to court, we can have an advocate that's assigned. Usually when it goes to the CAC, they send a referral over to us and we work with the family and support them throughout the whole criminal justice process. We have a 24/7 hour hotline as well as a text line. So if someone doesn't feel comfortable talking on the phone, they can do it by text or online if they go to our website. We man that during daytime hours for that. We do provide the forensic exam. So you heard a little bit that Shelly was talking about. She does the accompaniment to the hospitals. So we have forensic nurses through Nova, so it's not actual hospital staff who does the examinations. They call in our Nova nurses. So they have a rotating schedule. We have about 20 nurses right now. Some of them are finishing some onboarding after COVID. We had several that left, rightfully so. It was a hard time. So so we do all the forensic exams. We have an education department that does prevention education programs from preschool all the way to secondary education. So we really do a lot at Nova. And obviously our mission is to support and empower victims of crimes in Bucks County and to work to prevent the violence throughout, by doing trainings, advocacy, and prevention education. So with human trafficking, it is one of the largest growing and fast growing criminal enterprises. Drug trafficking is number 1, human trafficking is number 2. And it is a global phenomenon that is obtaining and maintaining labor trafficking and sex trafficking. So today I'm primarily going to be talking about sex trafficking because that's what we see most in Bucks County. There is labor trafficking that happens, but primarily we work with sex trafficking victims. So traffickers exploit, their victims. It's a revenue. And it's really the buyers, the people who are buying the commercial sex that is fueling, unfortunately, this horrific, with human trafficking. So, when investigations are being done, I know a lot more law enforcement are doing sting operations and whatnot, is that we, want to focus on the buyers, because if we can stop them, this is what stops human trafficking. So how traffickers get involved of finding victims is they will, with our youth, through social media. I say it, social media is the devil for our kids. I mean, they don't know, as Kristin was saying, they don't know who they're talking to on the other end. Traffickers, I call them like caterpillars. They know how to find the people that are vulnerable. Whether it's, you're seeing it through if they have been through the child welfare system, drug and alcohol, mental health, unstable, homes are not stable, a whole variety of different things. And they do it by befriending them, essentially. And that, I don't know if you guys heard of grooming before, so a lot of it is that grooming process to really befriend them, get to know them, and slowly isolate them away from their friends and family. So you see it through social media, going to, for adults, a lot of times they will go to drug and alcohol facilities, sober homes, whatnot, because a lot of, for adults, it's fueled because of the opioid epidemic. They lure them in by promising them drugs, a safe place to stay, love, but really they're holding the drugs as a way for them to do these acts, and their reward is the drugs. So, I mean, they know how to take their vulnerabilities and use it to their advantage. You have ones that play, they call them Romeo pimps, so they're being like that loving boyfriend and, trusting, and then having them do it for them. Hey, this will give us a better life. This will give us more money. But then you also have what are called guerrilla pimps. These are the people that use violence. They will beat them, and really torture them, injure them. So they have different tactics that they use to lure them in. And it's really so that they can keep control of them. They do it to where they isolate them enough where they are to not trust anyone. So when we do get, involved, where the law enforcement gets involved, we're able to get them out of the life, it's very difficult for them to talk with law enforcement or to trust anyone, because they have learned to do that, not to talk to anyone. So we see some signs that we do of, we educate and go out not only to professionals, but obviously to community members as well. And so like in the hospitals, you may have a woman that comes in, she's not typically gonna be by herself. And I'm gonna say women, it happens to both men and women, but men unfortunately are so underreported that we primarily see women. So it happens to both, but you may hear me say more with women. But they're not gonna be coming by themselves. They're not gonna be able to talk for themselves. So, or they're always gonna be looking down. They're not gonna trust anyone. So these are kind of like, especially with hospitals, that we kind of have been going out instructing and, educating nurses and doctors of the signs to look for and how they can. I always said I did a whole bunch of trainings with Abington Nursing. And one thing that they suspected, I said a good way to get them alone is, hey, they have to go get a CAT scan. Well, you can't have anyone go with you when you get a CAT scan, or urine. And they would have 2 different colored markers in the bathroom. And they said, if you need help or you're unsafe, write your name in the red marker. So that way when she brought her urine back out, they see the red, they knew that whether they need to get security involved or to get them away from that person. So these are like the little tricks that we have taught in going out. But just to kind of give some statistics, obviously with working in Bucks County, is that 80% of the victims are female compared to men. In labor trafficking, it's about 50-50, it's pretty even. Females of color are more susceptible of being victimized. Specifically, 40% are African American and 24% are Latino compared to their white counterparts. Adults are more prevalent to the sex trafficking and labor trafficking. Children still account for 32%, which is 1/3 of human trafficking victims. And then when it comes to immigration, 85% of labor trafficking victims are foreign naturals, while a majority of sex trafficking victims are actually US citizens and legal residents. So what we call for sex trafficking of children, because I want to focus more about that, is we call it CSAC, which stands for the Commercial Sexual Exploitation of Children. So the federal law in regarding sex trafficking is that there has to be some form of force, fraud, or coercion for it to be considered or human trafficking. Anyone who's under the age of 18, they don't have to be forced, they don't have to be. If there is some kind of exchange of value for something, whether it's a place to sleep, food, drugs, that is considered sex trafficking or human trafficking. Okay, that's like the big difference between adults and for children. So, what was it? Sorry, I lost my train of thought there for a minute. So in 2023, the National Center of Missing and Exploited Children had estimated there are 100,000 children and youth under the age of 18 who already are involved in commercial sex acts. So what we do is we work very closely with Bucks County Children and Youth when it comes to this, because part of that child line that Kristin was talking about, one of the questions that they've added, and they've just added this within the last few years, is if there is suspected sex or labor trafficking. They used to not be on child line report questions, but now they have that. So anytime that anyone marks a yes for that and gives a description of what they believe, that automatically goes to children and youth. And so they will get involved and they send us what's called a CSAC referral. So they send us an assessment referral over, and it is a screening tool, an assessment to determine whether or not that juvenile is at risk, is already involved in some kind of trafficking situation. And then we have a series of questions. The state uses a specific screening tool for it, an assessment. But myself, my current advocate, we know how to ask further questions, especially once you build that rapport with that kid. And we're asking, so we'll start with like the demographics, but we're asking about what their school situation is, what's home life, what's involved, past traumas, tattoos. So the big reason I say tattoos is that a lot of traffickers brand essentially, and there are specific tattoos that they will use to pretty much claim that this person belongs to them. We've seen it through crowns, butterflies, dollar signs, barcodes. So ones that you may see that you would never think that could be a potential symbol that was done by, they were forced to get that tattoo done. So we ask about tattoos that they have, the meaning, where'd you get it, who went with you. We ask about their internet use. Have you ever met anyone online that you've never met in person? Like you talked with them online and then you went up and met with them. Past sexual abuse traumas, their job history. What kind of job did you have? What field was it in? Were you ever not paid, what you were promised or told? So these are like some of the signs that we can determine whether or not that they have been exploited or not. And so once the assessment's done, and Danielle, who's my current advocate, has done a phenomenal job of building rapport to where she has like pages and pages of assessment notes, because we pass then that assessment that we do, we type everything up and we send it back to children and youth. And she's determining whether they are definitely not, most likely not sure yet, potentially is, or definitely is a victim, or at high risk of being a victim of child exploitation. And then she'll give recommendations whether, they could benefit from trauma counseling, in-home services. Maybe there's some dynamic where the parents just can't seem to keep their child safe, or the biggest thing is, so we meet with the parents and we always ask them, like, do you go through your kid's phone? Like, do you check it? And many of them are like, no, we don't want to, intervene in their privacy. Well, you should. You should, because, instructing, look at their Instagram and the DMs, the direct messages, Facebook. So the apps that we're seeing it are Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat is a big one, because apparently now, and I learned this because I have a 16-year-old, so he's teaching me stuff about this, that there's a thing called like quick add. So these are people who are complete strangers, and it's very easy to quickly add, and then they start chatting. And so I always tell him, I was just like, are any of these people on your list? Because I go through his phone. He hates it, but he knows what I do from working at Children and Youth in here. And I said, who's this? Who's this? And so, while we're doing these assessments, we're also providing psychoeducation to these minors as well. Because a lot of them don't know. You know, they're at a developmental age where they don't realize the harm and the risk that they're putting themselves into of talking to strangers online and where it's gonna lead to, as Kristin was saying with the pictures, you know, and everything and exchanging, and then it's possible sextortion, you know, of happening. So the youth that we have met with, a lot of them are runaways. So that's where with children youth, when these are kids who are already involved with children youth, or in foster care, or even non-foster care, they have a long history of running away, and many of them are going down to Philadelphia. So where a lot of the crimes that are happening, whether they were raped or there was some kind of exchange for money, it's happening in Philadelphia, or where they're running away. Some have gone to other states. So now we're making kind of multiple reports here. We have gotten FBI involved, because obviously if they have disclosed any kind of potential trafficking that's happened, we're getting the immediate law enforcement involved that we need to. We're usually calling up Kristin like, hey, we got this situation. What do we want to do with it? You know, whether that's, let's get an interview, trying to interview the child. First, let's make sure they get them to a safe place, especially if they've been on the run. You know, we don't ever like to lock up kids, but if it means having them be in our detention center, their Bucks County Youth Detention Center, to keep them safe. I used to work there. It's like a country club. It's really not that bad there. But if it means getting them to a safe place, why we can figure out where to go from here, whether it's a specialized residential program or whatnot, their safety is number one. And this is where that multidisciplinary team comes into play. Just like with child abuse, we're usually getting potentially juvenile probation involved. They have one probation officer who specializes in like the trafficking cases. Law enforcement, the DA's office, children and youth, if there's other service providers that they're already working with, we try and get everyone together to formulate what is the best plan for this child to keep safe, get the help they need, so we're not preventing this, we are preventing from continuing or happening again. So we obviously, from an advocacy standpoint, we provide the advocate services that we provide for our trafficking victim is very different from our other advocates. They're only working with our clients as they go through the criminal justice system. So if a case doesn't get charged, we'll make sure they have whatever they need, and usually our services on that end. Or if a case has gone through the criminal justice system, everything's set, there's no appeals, then we close out. With our trafficking cases, there is no ending. We're doing a lot more case management. So we're helping them once they're out of that life, and this is for adults and for children. We're helping them to either get into a safe house. So every county has a specific trauma-informed residential program for human trafficking, only for human trafficking survivors. They are confidential locations, so we know where they are, but it's not a public address of where it is, because obviously for safety reasons. Juvenile programs are a little bit harder, but we have established some, and that's come from, I know the FBI victim advocate very well, who also does a lot of these child exploitation cases, so she's helped me to build that resource list of where we can go if we need a kid to get to a specialized program. So making sure that they're, again, getting that trauma counseling, we're setting realistic goals with them so that they can achieve to rebuild their life. Ensuring that they are getting the drug and alcohol treatment that they need, because we do see the majority of cases have some form of drug use that's involved. Mental health is a big one, and really just guiding them at what they want, because again, it's coming back to empowerment. Their rights were taken away from them. They were always told what to do. So when they come out, this is that difficult part of building that rapport, because we're trying to teach them how to speak for themselves, how to make decisions for themselves. That can take a year, that could take 2 years, but it's where knowing that they have that support, because many of them have no supports, that they always have someone to go to. And realistically, we know there's a chance that they could go back to that life. I learned a hard lesson when I first started in this position, that I had a client who did that. And I made the worst mistake by telling that person that I was disappointed in them. And I realized that afterwards, because she brings me a new one. And I thought about it, and I was just like, who am I to say that? I'm supposed to be her support person. So okay, so you decide to go back. Coming out when you're making money, doing what you're doing, and then coming out with no really education, no job experience, and they're going to maybe work at McDonald's making minimum wage when they were making a whole, I can totally understand that so many of them do go back into that, unfortunately. Even knowing the violence that happens and everything else, they still go back into it. So what we do is we do safety planning instead. So if they choose to go back, they know to have our number. They know what to do. They know what to do if they're in an unsafe situation, how to get out, a plan of how you're gonna get out. So it's a lot involved. It's a lot of patience, you know, and it's learning to be able to go to their level of where their thinking process is. And sometimes, especially with the kids, we have to meet with them on usually more than one occasion because it is a lot of trust building that is happening. So, you know, it is happening in our backyards. We're seeing a lot in our hotels down in the lower part of the county, along Route 13 in Bensalem, in Bristol Township, around this area in Warminster, the Motel 6 on Street Road, and up in Quakertown, there's those hotels that are right by the, the Turnpike exit. Because that's the big thing, is that they want a place where they can get quick access in and off of highways and whatnot. But they do it in homes as well, so that's why we call them like in-home services. But it's happening everywhere, you know, and it's not, I'm sure you guys would know the movie Taken. Everyone always like, oh, it's like Taken. It's not. You're not just getting snatched off of the street, you know, I mean, it does happen in foreign countries too, but it's nothing like that here, you know, and I think the awareness of knowing the signs and everything is very important in educating. And one quick thing that we do have a coalition in Bucks County. I'll be really quick, 1 minute left. We have a coalition in Bucks County. It's the Bucks County Coalition Against Trafficking. We're always looking, if this is something that you're interested in, we can talk more afterwards, but we're always looking for volunteers. We go out, again, educate, learning to do more in our community. We have community speakers that come in. So if this is something of interest, we can talk later. All right, sorry, Shelly, sorry. I could talk all day about this stuff.
Jasmine Craig. Jasmine's going to promote women's place to speak on domestic violence. They're all fabulous, and we can go on all day.
But we won't, don't worry. So I am Jasmine Craig, Director of Prevention, Education, Outreach, and Training at A Woman's Place. So you got some pretty in-depth information from the other two panelists. I'm going to give a little bit more of a broader look at community violence, specifically intimate partner and domestic violence, but how it also interrelates to some of the other forms of community violence that we've been talking about. Just so that you as community members can kind of understand what we do individually, but also how we as organizations also kind of work together to help with different specialties, and also how you as community members can feel empowered to do your part, hopefully, to help reduce community violence. So what is domestic violence? So domestic violence and intimate partner violence can be kind of interchanged, but there are a little differences. So A Woman's Place, or AWP, only provides services to those who are surviving intimate partner or domestic violence. So what that means is if we get a human trafficking, let's say, survivor, we would ask if the we would want to know that the human trafficking is happening from a familial kind of standpoint, right? So 40% of children who are human trafficked are human trafficked by a family member. Okay, so that would be like a domestic violence situation, right? If not, we're gonna partner with NOVA, right? We're gonna send them to other agencies. So that's an example. Child abuse. Child abuse is automatic, you know, criminal behavior. So for us, we are mandated reporters. So again, we would have to go through the child line, we would have to report that, we would work with law enforcement, we would work with, you know, the DA, things like that. So the unique part of domestic and intimate partner violence is that many of the behaviors are not criminal. So a lot of times people don't know where to go if they're surviving forms of domestic or intimate partner violence. And so they come to us. which is, well, let's hope that they come to us. So like I said before, domestic and intimate partner violence are a little bit different. So domestic violence occurs in a household. So it can be, you know, with people who are related to you by marriage or by blood, okay? Intimate partner violence, however, is a romantic relationship. So either a current or former romantic partner, okay? So that's a little bit of the difference. So we serve individuals who are surviving intimate partner violence in later life or elder abuse, adolescent relationship abuse, domestic violence, and childhood domestic violence. That's kind of our specialty area. Only about a third of survivors of domestic or intimate partner violence disclose that they're surviving any kind of abusive situation. And there can be lots of reasons why. One of the reasons could be that, you know, not everyone who is a survivor needs our services. You know, that's okay. Sometimes they have a great support network. Sometimes, you know, they have kind of the interpersonal resiliency to kind of move out of that relationship safely without it escalating. Sometimes, you know, they do need our services. And so we'll talk a little bit more about what we do provide and how DV and intimate partner violence is experienced in relationships. So there are about 6 to 7 different types of abuse that can occur in domestic or intimate partner relationships. It's important to know these things because a lot of times one of the barriers to disclosing or to getting support is that people don't realize that they're actually surviving domestic violence, especially when we're talking about adolescents. So 16 to 24-year-olds experience the highest rate of dating violence. That's 3 times the national average. And a lot of that is, you know, kind of what we talked about a little bit with the human trafficking and the child abuse is they don't know. They don't know, or, you know, they get themselves kind of wrapped up in something and then are kind of stuck in this cycle and don't know what to do about it or how to get out of it, or then are further exploited, right? So there are 6 types of abuse. And since we're a very small and intimate group, why don't you tell me, what are some types of abuse that you can think of off the top of your head? Verbal abuse. Physical. Emotional. So I said 6 or 7 types because we can say psychological abuse with mental and emotional, spiritual kind of together. Physical. Financial. Sexual, and
How about like the controlling? Yeah, I was thinking control.
we'll get to that.
Okay.
We talked about this a lot, especially with youth. Cyber. Hey, we got it. Or digital abuse, correct. So there's a range of different types of abuse. Now you mentioned coercion, right? So abuse is a pattern of coercive control tactics used to control another person. And so it's not like you're just experiencing one. You could just be experiencing one, but typically what we see is an overlap of different coercive behaviors. And then you get kind of stuck in this cycle of abuse that will escalate, okay? Like I said before, a lot of the behaviors aren't illegal, right? They're not criminal acts. It's not until we start really seeing an escalated cycle that we see more severe kind of sexual or physical contact violence, which means that typically these coercive tactics are happening in these relationships, have been happening for quite a while already. Maybe there was some verbal, some psychological, some financial, and it just kept escalating, okay? So our job, your job as community members, is to really interrupt violence when we see it, when we hear it, in wherever it is, because that cycle won't just fizzle out on its own. That cycle of violence will increase in intensity and prevalence. And so unless we are intentionally interrupting these moments of violence as when they show up, you know, they won't just go away. right? There has to be something that interrupts. And so a lot of times what we do and what we're talking about up here is that we respond to individuals who are surviving some type of violence. So I'm going to talk about that, but I also want to talk a little bit about preventing, right? What we can do as community members to help prevent some of this violence and the prevalence of this violence in our county. I'm just going to give you a content warning. I am going to be talking about the prevalence of DV in Bucks County, specifically fatalities due to domestic violence in Bucks County. So last year, our hotline got about over 4,400 phone calls just in Bucks County, just in a year, knowing that only a third of individuals disclose domestic violence. Okay, we have 4,400 calls. So this is prevalent in Bucks County. Typically in Bucks County averages at about 6 fatalities or homicides due to domestic violence, murders. This year so far we're at 9 murders due to domestic violence. And we have seen a man murder his elderly mother, so we've got elder abuse. We have seen a man murder his wife and child, his college-age child, right? So that's domestic as well as intimate partner violence, right? We have seen an ex-boyfriend stab a 19-year-old, his ex-girlfriend, and murder her, right? So now we're at adolescent relationship abuse. We've seen a mother kill her 2 children, okay? So this is, again, when we're talking about this type of community violence, it isn't, we've mentioned that it spans socioeconomics, it spans other backgrounds and identities, right? And so we want to talk about, so what do we do, right? And for AWP, we do serve the individual and the families. So someone might call us, our access line is 24/7, or however they want to access us. And our focus on advocacy is we follow a JARS model of advocacy. And I want you to, hopefully kind of embrace this acronym for when you might want to advocate for anyone, or maybe interrupt some instances of violence that you might witness. So JARS advocacy stands for justice, autonomy, restoration, and safety. Okay, so when someone calls us, we're going to focus on safety. What are you experiencing right now that makes you feel most unsafe, right? What can we do to make you feel safer? Maybe they'll want a protection from abuse order. Maybe they'll want support groups. Maybe they'll, it's financial abuse and they need to access our pantry, right? Who knows, we're gonna ask them what do they need to make them feel safer. And we're gonna provide them a whole lot of suggestions on what they can do, maybe to empower themselves. And that's autonomy, right? So the community violence, interpersonal violence takes away people's agency. It's about control. Everything that we've talked about, the different instances of violence, is about control and reducing someone's power. So the autonomy, we're gonna give you a whole lot of choices, but you can have your agency back. You get to make the choices that feel right for you. A lot of times, we wanna say, just break up, or why would you go back, or all of these things, right? Because maybe that's our natural reaction, but we want to make sure that we're giving them the option of what feels right for you. And sometimes they have decision fatigue, and they're like, can you just tell me what to do? Just tell me what to do. And so we want to make sure that we are empowering them and encouraging them and restoring, that's restoration, that trust within themselves. You have your agency, you have your voice, you can make these decisions. We're gonna do it together, right, step by step. And then we get to justice. So what feels most just, right? And we're gonna consider law, we're gonna consider what's lawful, and then we're also gonna consider what's right. Sometimes what's lawful doesn't feel right for that person. I'm not saying we're gonna break the law. Sometimes we have tension between other departments and agencies and but we're advocates, right? And I mean, just last week, a 17-year-old, after a presentation I did at a school, came up to me and was like, you know, I got kicked out of my house, I'm living with my girlfriend's family, there's a lot of abuse going on, my parents stole all my money, I don't wanna go to court. I don't wanna take my parents to court. That doesn't feel just for that person. What else can we do, right? So we have to think about that, what would feel right for you, what feels just for you. And then restoration, that's last, restoration. So as much as we wanna make sure that we are meeting someone when they're at their crisis, we also wanna make sure that we are walking with them to restore what abuse took away from them, okay? So that means that we also have to consider the different types of abuse you are experiencing. Maybe it's financial abuse, you need financial restoration, you need job support, you need help writing a resume, you need help with like restoring your credit. Maybe you need physical safety, maybe you need security cameras, maybe it's digital, like we're looking at your passwords, we are seeing who has access to your, like the Amazon, the homes and the Google Home and all of those abusers. Imagine you hear your abuser's voice like in your living room, or like they can watch you like through your, it's eerie, right? So maybe it's things like that they need help, they need that restoration work. So we do, JARS, justice, autonomy, restoration, and safety, remember that. And I'm definitely grateful that we are here together because like I said, we do focus on families and individuals, but we also focus on the collective. At A Woman's Place, we believe that, intimate partner violence and domestic violence happens in a social context, right? So in order to achieve our mission of making sure that every person is safe in their relationships and can flourish, we have to engage social change. So we don't just use JARS individually, but we use it, kind of as a collective. And that's why I'm kind of grateful that we're all here together, because you can kind of see how we work together, right? We belong to each other. As community members, we belong to each other. And these issues, it's a community issue. It's a public health issue, right? And so we all should feel responsible and hopefully empowered to make change and engage social change so that we can end some of this violence. I'm really grateful for community partners that handle individuals who are in crisis and who have undergone traumas and are ready to, prosecute perpetrators. But how can we reduce the need? I want to be out of a job, and so for social change, we ask things like, how is power being distributed in our communities? There's a reason why we listen to statistics of why, identities that have been most marginalized are most at risk for violence, different types of violence. So we're curious about why that is and how we can change so that those statistics, right? So we're asking about power. How is it being distributed in our communities? How is it being used? How is power being misused? What populations are being coerced, exploited, manipulated, or under-resourced for another's benefit? How are we reinforcing the legacies of unhealthy interactions, right? And we consider ideas of masculinity, of social dominance, of equal access, opportunities, representation. All of these have to do with how violence can show up in our communities and how it's being kind of reinforced. Our medical advocate was doing a program at a substance abuse rehab center last week, and most of them were men, and they were talking about their substance use, especially as self-medicating, right? It began when they had their own history of trauma. They may have had their own domestic violence, childhood domestic violence. And they didn't feel like there was a space as a guide to kind of share what they were going through or kind of and they relied on substance use. And now they're in these relationships where, a few disclose that like their partner, their women in their lives use their substance use and substances as a type of coercive control tactic in their relationship, right? So it's just thinking about how all of these different types of community violence are interrelated, and hopefully we can remember ours and we can feel responsible to kind of advocate for each other. And I did just want to share just a little bit about the resources that are in the back in case you were curious. Our brochure is here, so you can see kind of all the services we do offer, and if you want to volunteer with us, there's a whole brochure on adolescent relationship abuse as well for, if you have any adolescents in your life. And then our youth services, so anyone 14 and older can access our resources for free. And then obviously under 14, we also have services and resources, and an easy way for you to know the difference. This is a postcard that specifically discusses the intersections of mental health and substance use on domestic and intimate partner violence. And then this is a talking points packet. This is more about kind of that social change component that has to do with why inclusive schools are violence reduction. Okay, so that is all that I have for you. Thank you so much for hanging in there with us.
Okay, well that was terrific. Thank you guys, that was fabulous. All right, well now it's time for our Q&A. So think about it, Stan is going to come around with a microphone and just raise your hand and he will.
Our office or, outside things or parents who has a lot of ugly divorces. And obviously all of them are not coming to a full-blown legal investigation. So I was just kind of curious what happens between the time the call is made and you decide it really meets the standard of further investigation.
So,
You have to turn it on.
oh, there we go. Working? Okay. So when the child line report is made, Children and Youth has a requirement to see the child within 24 hours.
Depends on what it is. So if it's a CPS, so Child Protective Services, that's like I don't need a microphone. I got a lot. I hate microphones. So if it's something where we have injuries, like that sexual abuse, physical abuse, they do have 24 hours to get out. Now we also have our general protective services. So these are like mental health concerns, drug and alcohol concerns, homelessness. Those, depending on the age of the child, can range from 3 to 5 days to go out. If we have like older adolescents, it could be I think it's 8 to 10 days. So it really depends on what's being reported. But if it is something on the severe of the Child Protective Services end of things, they have within 24 hours to get out to see them. So there is that assessment of safety that's being done in the home or interviewing the child at school. A lot of times that's what we did. I worked in the intake when I was at Children and Youth. We love going out to schools because obviously we want to just meet with the child, and it's better to talk with them without the potential alleged offender, especially if it's in the home. So schools are a safe place to talk. So there is someone on the for serious matters are going out within 24 hours, and it's usually that same day.
And between that though, and kind of going to the point where there's the whole group evaluation, that's the point I was kind of wondering.
So when the child line gets made, I get an email if it was in Bucks County, and it gets forwarded to law enforcement. So it's pretty quick that we get involved, if that's what answering your question.
Yeah, I guess it seems that not all of them seem to get to that point. Some of them they're found and unfounded sort of quickly, and I wasn't sure what that process was what's going on when you say unfounded versus the whole, obviously what you discussed, which is very helpful, was at a different level.
Yeah, because even some, depending, again, it's such case by case, that some actually, obviously for it to get to Children and Youth, that whoever the alleged perpetrator is has to be some kind of capacity of caring for that child or their, child welfare, they're caring for their welfare. There are some cases that don't go to Children and Youth. They are what we call law enforcement only. So if whoever the alleged perpetrator is not in that caretaking role of being responsible for that child, it may not get to Children and Youth. So that's going to law enforcement, that's going to the DA's office. And then they're kind of assessing of, all right, well, we may have to do some then investigative process.
And I did want to just add to that we are starting a new initiative with children and youth, which is really exciting. So when, you know, they are sent into the homes and, you know, maybe there are, again, we've talked about how a lot of, they see domestic violence, but can't really do much about it. And so we are now working with children and youth so that if they can't necessarily, you know, it's unfounded or they can't necessarily get law enforcement involved, they still have a lifeline that they can send kind of family members to us to help bridge some. So we're seeing that there's like these gaps, right? And so we're hoping to kind of work together a little bit more to make sure that, yeah, we're covering some of those gaps in care.
I actually have a question for Stephanie. Just a question of scale. What are you what's like in Bucks County the numbers that you're seeing in human trafficking?
That's always the big question that we always get at, and it's hard because like we don't always, majority of the time we don't have a lot of specific exact numbers because a lot go unreported that we have no idea what are going on. So I mean, cases that I can give you a rough idea of coming through, at least through our agency. Probably I would say we have between when I started, so I've been there 6.5 years, from when I started, we have maybe worked with about 50 victims between children and adolescents. Now, I'm gonna kind of separate the CSAC assessments because not all the CSACs, those assessments that we do, they're not, like they're at high risk of becoming a victim, but they weren't direct. I know from when I started, we have prosecuted about three or four cases through the criminal, criminal justice system. The hard part is that, you know, they have a specific charge for child sex trafficking. A lot of times these minors, they're saying that they're 18, so it's hard that we can't charge with the child sex trafficking, which is like a 20 to 40 year sentence. But there is, you know, human trafficking, there is a charge of that, or some kind of like promoting prostitution. So like, it's really frustrating because we want to get them on that child sex trafficking, you know, charge, but it's hard to prove that they've lied about their age. But so it's hard to get specific numbers on that.
Now, I was just curious if we were talking about 3,000 or 30 or 300. So it's
yeah, I mean, I know that there are a lot that are in the hotels from when they've done, you know, like I said, those sting operations. And you know, we've also in Bucks County, I didn't get into it, so in regard to the sex trafficking, is that Bucks County is the first county to do for the massage parlors. So that's not even just the labor trafficking, that's the sex trafficking. There are a lot being brought down from Flushing, New York to Bucks County. So there is an ordinance, Bucks County is the first county in Pennsylvania to put this ordinance into place of having to have certain hours. They have, you know, through the health department, they have special regulations and that they can go in at any time. So we have done actually multitude of undercover sting operations at these massage parlors where they have been sitting undercover and, you know, whatnot to see what stuff is going on after hours, in hours, what services are being offered while they're in there. And so some of them have not followed that ordinance and are providing sexual acts in exchange for money. So like, where we have worked with those victims, we don't always hold on to them because many of them want to just go back to New York. So we'll help assist that. Like we've helped assisted getting them back to their home, but it's trying to get them like, hey, well, while you're there in New York, this is who you can contact. So it's hard to say like number wise, but I think the hundreds is a fair number to say.
But it's a lot like the victim might live in Bucks County, but the victimization is happening in Philadelphia.
Right.
So from a prosecution standpoint, we don't have jurisdiction. Because Steph will talk about these numbers. I'm like, well, why aren't you referring them to us? And it's well, because the crime didn't happen here in Bucks County.
Yeah.
And for the massage parlors, I can think of one woman that's ever agreed to actually be interviewed and speak. And we bring translators when we're doing these investigations. And with her, we had to go to New York we met her, and she was like, I will not participate, but I will tell you what was going on. Most of these women will never give a statement. It's horrible.
They'll deny it, even though like they don't know that it was an undercover cop that they offered the services to. But yeah, it's hard.
And I think sometimes this is just my little thought in here too, is that so we have to also remember like the definition of human trafficking, especially with adults, and like that coercive control piece of it, and coercion, exploitation, because there are also sex workers that choose to be sex workers.
Yes.
Right, and so that's something else when we're looking at numbers and things like that it's something to consider.
Yeah.
That not everyone who's a sex worker is
Forced.
being forced and coerced into it.
And probably, unlike you, Stephanie, I need a microphone. I'm just curious what processes or procedures you have in place for like some of your employees or volunteers to make sure that they're safe, like there's not an ex-boyfriend or something like that, a perpetrator who might go after them.
You mean within our staff?
Within your staff and volunteers, I know,
Sure.
you know, both your organization and A Woman's Place have a lot of volunteers.
I mean, let me rephrase that. When you're coming on as a new employee, obviously we have like our staff orientation that they have to do. There's, you know, for us, there's a lot of different courses that are involved with it. So obviously we're discussing that, you know, safety wise, and I mean, that's a good question. I mean, I don't think we've actually had like in-depth, but I think, you know, the education piece of it, as if they were anybody getting that education piece.
I know that for AWP, so we have 2 admin offices, and we have security, not a person, but like we use hidden cameras. It's always locked. They're only staff members know the code to get into those buildings. Once the staff member leaves, we actually change the code for those buildings. We also have fobs inside, so that, you know, if someone comes to the door and it ends up being, you know, some kind of abuser or someone who is looking for some, you know, to cause problems. There's a fob on each floor and outside of each office room that it automatically contacts law enforcement. We also do, currently, our shelter is in a non-disclosed location, you know, for some of that reasons, especially with shelter staff, because they are doing overnights, and that is another risk of kind of safety. As far as social media goes, we do not tag our volunteers or staff members on social media. You'll see my face on our Instagram quite often, but it's always voluntary. Like I choose, and I'm never, like my personal, you know, account isn't tagged. So yeah, same with anyone, like volunteers, staff, we always make sure that we're getting consented, even just for your face, let alone, you know, same with our websites, anything like that, especially those who are working in direct service, directly with survivors and their families.
And we have the same thing, the key fobs, we have some emergency buttons that go directly to Warwick Township Police.
I mean, I can say something, but Stan and I have been with Nova for 24 years. I mean, we can't get in and out of the building without, you know, going through security. We volunteer and do a lot for Nova. Our pictures are taken a lot. Julie, I mean, they'll never put our picture up without asking us if we're willing to have our faces on anything.
And we have to sign something of whether you can.
So we're always asked before we give them permission to use our bushes on anything that they want to do.
And I will say, not only do staff members, but also all of our volunteers have to agree to get all of their background checks done.
We're background checked, and we have so many hours of training, and we have to do it every year, 10 hours of training every year, constantly. We're getting trained today, we get 2 hours for this.
Check.
That's why you
I know.
Well, I didn't know that till Julie sent out to everybody, if they came today, they would get 2 hours. I didn't know we were going to go there.
Thanks.
Hi, I have a question for Kristin and Stephanie. Well, it sounds like, Kristin, this would be more you. I just heard, I think that, so if someone is abused as an adult, they do not have to prosecute the perpetrator, is that correct?
And they were victimized as an adult, so it would, there's a 12-year statute of limitation if it was a felony of the first degree and lower if it's a misdemeanor. The decision on whether they wanted to prosecute would be discussed with whatever DA is assigned to the case in law enforcement. So usually first step is, do we think it is prosecutable? And if we do, then it's usually that conversation with them of if they want to or not.
All right, but they don't have to if they don't want to. So like, in California, I know where I used to live, that was mandated. Like, you didn't have a choice if you didn't want to press charges, you had to. And so I'm just wondering, here, that does not seem to be.
No, in a sexual assault, we would have that conversation. I will say on domestic violence, usually like if police go out to a house and there's a domestic violence with visible injuries, they will file charges right then.
Yeah.
Oh, they will, oh.
The
yeah.
police
So
will.
that's,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
All right, now for a more like difficult question. Well, maybe not difficult, more difficult for me, how about that? I have neighbors, there's 3 houses with people coming and going. I don't know their names, I don't know who they are, but there's different kids, different cars, different adults. It seems suspicious.
Are we talking like all hours of the day, only
I don't
specific
know,
times?
they don't live right next to me, but I hear an earful from a friend of mine who lives next door. It's concerning, I mean.
Do you know are these people coming, do you know the actual neighbors that live in that residence?
I don't know any of their names, I've said hello before.
Okay.
They're, yeah. So
I was just curious because one of my neighbors actually rents out their place as like an Airbnb or like a short-term rental, so we get people coming all the time.
So I do think that the women in there, there's moms with multiple young children, and I think they are consistently there. They're from another country. I think their 3 might be sisters or relatives, but the men tend to be different, and all of a sudden there's these older girls, like teenage girls, who I thought there had been 1, and now there's like 3. And I don't know if they're just relatives, but it just seems suspicious because a car will just hang out and then drive around and then come back and keep their lights on in the dark, and it's just like, okay, what's going on?
So I always say, see something, say something. So, you know, if you really have concern, or maybe talk to some of the other neighbors that you know if they've seen similar things, or if they've seen things like, because the big thing is, if you're seeing that at like all hours of the day, yeah, there's definitely some concern. You can always make a police report. Be like, listen, this is what we're seeing, concern of just the welfare of who's in the house. You know, you can make it anonymously, you know, and they could always do a welfare check to go see what's going on.
So I would just give an address, say, I have no clue who the people are, but, okay.
I also, because I'm difficult, would say we also want to engage in cultural responsiveness as well, right? You said that they're from a different country, and so typically a lot of times they have their own kind of norms and tight-knit communities, and you know, that can be part of what's happening as well. And so it's also can be more isolating to have law enforcement show up because somebody just thought you were suspicious when
and
you didn't feel like you were doing anything suspicious. You were just, it's, you know, the way that your culture is, and the way that the subculture might look in, you know, a majority culture might feel suspicious. But so that's just what I would say. And I think that maybe if you feel safe enough to be neighborly, go over and, hey, you've been here for a while. I see people coming in and out. I just wanted to give you this. Hi. How are things going? Hi, I'm whoever.
Yes.
You know.
Right. And I mean,
and kind of see what the atmosphere is, how they're responding to that, right? I mean, from there, if they're much more, you know, the body language, the posture, if it's, you know, peeking out the curtain, if, you know, I would say just engage some cultural responsiveness as well, and don't just jump to
Yeah, and that's a good point. Like if you're seeing like literally all shades are down all out, like you know.
No, and it's not like that. They do go because I walk my dog a lot, and so I'll see, and I always say hi. And some of the younger kids play in the street, and, yeah, but the kids will tend to be out later, than kind of on their own, I guess, sometimes without supervision. And then, yeah, but people are coming in and out, like they'll go from one house to the next, which I would think is totally normal. Yeah, it is.
Be vigilant, you
Yes.
know, you may do some of your own little detective work, maybe one night on a weekend, you stay up a little later and kind of see what the activity looks later in the evening,
Right.
you know, like later in
Yes.
the evening. Cause you're right, it could be with different cultures, you know, they hold celebrations or prayer, and it's like a lot of community that comes in to do that. So yeah, I mean, it's just be vigilant, make friends with your neighbors if you feel safe to do so.
So say be careful, yeah, just be safe.
And I will say, a lot of illegal activity, you're not gonna see kids just hanging out in the middle of the neighborhood playing. I mean, yeah, they might be late, but like,
Right.
if they're, you know, sometimes it's gonna be a little bit less obvious.
Yeah, no, I just don't know what's happening, like, when the
Inside.
kids are out, the older kids are in, and the different people going in. And there's screens that.
Do they respond to your
Apparently
dog
a
when you walk your
neighbor-
dog?
What's that?
Do the kids respond to your dog when you walk your dog?
No, at first, yes, because at first, like, I would say hi, the moms don't speak much English, some of the little kids do.
Do you know what kind of nationality that they
They're
are?
from Uzbekistan.
Okay.
So I got that when they first moved here, or when we all first moved.
Well, luckily you have contacts,
Yeah.
so if things get more curious.
So it would just be a report to the police?
I mean, if you really are suspecting that something
I
is
think
going
that
on,
was
you
too,
know, so that's why I
like,
mean, it's being
detective.
vigilant, you know, if you're hearing screams, you know, like stuff
That
that,
was a
you're right.
neighbor said that, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
I don't need a microphone either. I don't think I can talk loud enough. So first of all, thank you all for coming and for the things you do. I couldn't do it. Shelley, I had no idea you were that involved. And I remember when Doylestown Hospital built their new ER, and one of the things they talked about was the room in the back with the shades, so it's much more private.
Actually, the room in the shades is for Lenape Valley for their mental health.
Yeah.
Our room is in the
They
far
told us
corner.
that was for. Oh, yeah, well, that was before.
That's like the observation room for the mental health for Lenape crisis centers there. No, the room that we use it looks like a normal hospital room,
Really?
but it has our special, but
I'm
it's away
sorry.
from the main
But we
part.
do have a little room that
We do.
we do have, that we can.
It's in the other far corner.
Right, and we do have a room, we do have a room.
Yeah, but anyways, I said thank you for your, but several things go through my head. First of all, when you're taking an interview, I mean, first of all, it's gotta be frustrating in not knowing how much truth, if any, is coming into your ears. How many people are just, you know, lying, sure they might hold back, but how many is, you know, total falsification, so it throws you off. When you have interviewed a child, now you said the persecutor, the bad person has the right to confront the victim, even in a child case. So I mean, that's upsetting to me. I mean, I'm thinking this was 5 or 6 years old.
That's just in the
girl.
courts too.
Yeah.
That's not like that you get to have a one-on-one.
No,
face.
I
Yeah, okay.
understand that. No,
Yeah.
I understand that. But is it ever that if it does go to trial, instead of that poor kid sitting up there in front of the jury and everybody else, that they can just use the session that you videoed, that's enough?
So unfortunately, no.
It's
we-
only on TV, they show.
Yeah, we play the video as like a piece of evidence in the trial, but we
Okay.
can't rely on that. There is a procedure, it's kind of like an in-camera review, where if you believe a child was so fragile, they could not be in the courtroom, or a judge would make sort of an individual determination on that. I will say though, that's like in theory, in practice, we really don't do that. I think our judges would not be in support of that. They really believe like it would be very prejudicial to a defendant if they saw it on like closed circuit TV of the kid being questioned, so that the jury can still see the prosecutor asking questions and the defense attorney, but the kid not being in the courtroom. You know, kids are resilient, and that is why, you know, if you prep with them, kind of take it slowly at their pace. I think what they are able to do is pretty remarkable. Even though I agree with you, it seems like horrible that we're making them go in the courtroom with the male or female that abused them. But
even if the child is 3 years old.
So those cases are a little bit harder to prosecute with that.
So what age do they make a child face the perpetrator?
Any age. So if you charge on a case with a 3-year-old, the reality is like you have to be legally competent to testify. So competency is pursued at the age of 14, but before that we have to show competency. So most like 8-year-olds are gonna meet that legal definition, but you still kind of go through that process. At 3, it is really, most of those kids would not legally hit that. So you would need something else. So like maybe there was a ring camera that caught something, or a nanny cam, or maybe the perpetrator confesses. So then you can prosecute. But if you only had what a 3-year-old reported and nothing else to corroborate, chances are we couldn't file criminal charges.
Is there any like data or follow-up about whether kids who are of a reasonable age who testify, does that restore agency down the line? I mean, if it's handled well, is that something where the kids feel empowered when looked at years later, like a 10-year-old or an 8-year-old? I'm just kind of curious whether it's been done.
It's a great question. I don't know. I do find though that when kids are so stressed and nervous and like don't want to go in the courtroom, when they're done, they often will say like, that wasn't as bad as I thought. Like what you imagine it's going to be is way worse. I always say sometimes like when we practice, like I'll have a colleague practice cross-examining the kid so they kind of get used to that type of questioning. And they will often say, wow, your coworker was way harder than the defense attorney, which is good because we want it to be harder in practice, and then in real life, you're like, okay, that, it was okay.
And I will say, even the defense attorneys in Bucks County, who obviously a lot of us, know, majority of them are pretty decent when it comes to kids having to testify. They're not like grilling them on the stand and making them cry. I mean, they're parents too, and so I think we're fortunate with that. Unlike Philadelphia, they just do whatever they want. But like in Bucks County, I think there is still some passion with that, with even the defense attorneys having to do their job, but keeping in mind that you have a child that's on the stand and doing it.
And Nova probably does this too, but we, if they come through our, agency and we have our advocates with them, kind of helping them with the process, we also offer free counseling. So they're also able to have, therapy. They're able to process some of like that emotional stress that may have happened, before and after being on, because I think that is, that's some of it too, right? Like when it's over, it might not feel over psychologically, right? And so that's part of that restoration and working through kind of really seeing the process.
Regardless of testifying, it's still an event that occurred. And
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And we do have tools that like we have fidget toys and like a rubber band as I'm sitting here playing. We have stuff that we can give them as their, so it's something small, like nothing outright, but like something just to keep in their hands. So when you're talking about that stressful thing, there has been a couple of times at the preliminary level, maybe a couple of times up at the common police court in Doylestown, that the advocate has actually been able, without saying anything, but we've actually sat next to that child, as they're, testifying. I know I've done that at the preliminary hearing on several occasions. So, yeah.
Good. 2 things. I have a Roxy therapy dog. I just retired her. She's 13 years old.
Aww.
And she doesn't
Ever did the court
appreciate it as
accompaniment
much.
once?
So we were trained in the court.
Okay.
We did the courts a little bit.
Okay.
And it was the most rewarding experience in the court. Like to see these kids sit with the dog. And there was actually a teenager that was from like a home who ended up talking to her social worker about possibly getting a dog in the home because it made her feel so. And so it started like the ball rolling of something else. And so I mostly went into the elementary schools for her to read with the kids.
That's what my son had that.
Okay.
Buddy the Basset Hound.
Okay, yeah. So if anybody has a dog, it's not a really hard process.
What kind of dog is she?
She's a Labradoodle.
No.
And she is just the most, since she's born, she's been the most gentle, like soul, like she just looks into your eyes and she just like, she's just amazing. But
it has been great because they come to the criminal court hearings. They also go for children youth of their dependency court hearings as well as PFA court, because I know when I sat up at PFA court with some of our clients, we've had the Roxy dogs come up too, and it is just fantastic.
Yeah. So, and then the other thing I wanted to ask was, when you are out in the community and doing your talks, how often do you get people come to you to say something and it leads to criminal or help for somebody?
Every single presentation I've ever been to, someone will come up afterward wanting my card. I never knew. I have questions about this. In fact, like I said, I was just at a high school, a week ago, and two students came up after me. I was at a tabling event. A woman comes down, pulls out her sunglasses. Hey, I'm interested about dropping off clothes. Do you have a business card for clothes that I can drop off, right? So, I mean, especially with domestic violence, I think it's very, for me, I mean, every single time, but I think it's because, again, when people can't call the cops, it feels almost relieving that there is somebody that they can talk to.
And I know with our educators going into the elementary schools and middle schools and doing these programs, they're learning about safe touches and all of that. They have gotten many disclosures from kids. Our educators make child line calls all the time, but it does, I agree, same thing happen, either how they can help or they have questions because they didn't realize that potentially they were, sometimes it can be triggering. A lot of the parents that we work with on these child abuse cases haven't also been victimized themselves, so it's really like hones in on them. So during the CACs, while the child's being interviewed, we have family support advocates that meet with the parents while the kid's being interviewed to talk about how they can support their child, what it's gonna look like afterwards of, we just like with the death, we deal with the five feelings of grief and everything. Same thing happens with this. There's going to be the anger, sadness, resentment, all that kind of stuff. So we work with the parents as well of how to help them, but sometimes a lot of it turns into kind of doing some counseling with them because they were a victim. This now has resurfaced their old wounds because now it's happened to their child. So, it's a lot of
friends, a lot of, how do I advocate if people, if they don't want to call? If I'm seeing this happen, how can I interrupt, right? What do I do? We see a lot of that. We also, I think it's great to be out in the community because, and I don't know if you see this, but like I said, like when our medical advocate was at that substance abuse center last week, we're talking to individuals from demographics that might not call a woman's place to get help on the phone, right? And that's men typically, that's teens typically. They don't just call an access line, right? Elders as well might not feel like that's something that's accessible for them. So getting out in the community, I think it also kind of increases, the availability.
Yeah.
And, so
and
we
kind
see
of
it
the
every
counterparts of working with other organizations. So I know with NOVA, we work a lot with AAA, which is I can always say them wrong. What is the mark? I always say it wrong.
Area Agency on Aging.
Thank you. They send over, so I have an elder abuse advocate, so I know this is going off topic, but he works closely with them, he's on the task force. So it's really also collaboration with all these other agencies that are involved in the county that they know with a woman's place with us and connecting. So they're telling their clients, hey, maybe they disclose something, call NOVA, call AWP, so it's really building those relationships and connections.
And sometimes I get calls and it's for domestic violence and I'll just give them.
Yeah, we refer them over and vice versa.
And I'm telling you, the biggest barrier that we see is that people do not know that they are surviving domestic violence. They just have no idea. It's psychological, it's verbal. They have no idea until they get a little bit more of that education, which is why we feel like, the presentations being out in the community that's why we don't have a walk-in center necessarily. We want to be out in the community educating first and foremost.
And we got started with Nova because somebody from Nova came to my nursery school and did a good touch, bad touch program while I was teaching. Eleanor.
I don't think I ever knew that. Oh, Eleanor.
And that's when I retired, and I said, this is where we're gonna go to.
And just a quick question, what's the statute of limitations for kids? Is it like past 18, how long?
Oh, it's complicated.
Well, so, let me tell you your point. Currently, if a child is abused now, there's no statute of limitations. So if they report when they're 50, it could still be investigated and possibly prosecuted.
Okay.
When Sandusky happened, the window got opened up to like 55 if you were born. It's like in April of 1997. If you were 18 or under 18, then we had till you're 55. And then prior to that, it was much smaller. So Sandusky is kind of what opened this up, and now homicides and child abuse are the only two that have no statute of limitations. And we prosecute a lot of cases. I have one right now where the men are now in their 30s, and it happened when they were 5, 6, 7, and they just now made a report, and so you'd be surprised the tools in law enforcement to still get the evidence on those cases. It's not going to be physical, but you can get.
Well,
Unfortunately, what else?
Church abuse too. It's very much-
Well, that was another one that kind of opened the.
Unfortunately, with sexual abuse cases, especially the ones where it's been a while, like the one you were just talking about, sometimes, unfortunately, numbers, more victims also help with the case. So, that one person who's brave to come forward and tell their story, because they do a lot of, oh my God, until I'm drawing a blank there. You guys do the recorded, press conferences, thank you. I couldn't think of that word. So, they do the press conferences like, oh, if you've been a victim, they show the pictures, it's amazing, then they're like, oh, someone else came forward. Okay, I'm gonna tell my story, so we've seen that a lot too.
So I can understand, like, especially for women being stuck in a bad relationship, especially with children, it becomes a financial issue. So you and I don't have to ask, I don't think. But Nova and A Woman's Place, besides any donations, how are you guys funded?
Grants.
Grants and donations.
Okay. And so as far as donation wise, because didn't you guys still have your thrift shop?
We do have, and so does A Woman's Place.
Okay.
Yeah, theirs is full swing,
which
and then
is mostly clothing, I think, right?
Clothing accessories, no household items.
Okay.
yeah. And so our Nova thrift shop, we do. We're up in right outside of Dublin, and we do all household items.
Where are you now?
So 313. If you go up,
It's west of 611?
Huh?
Is it that one that's west of 611?
No, going towards Dublin.
Yeah.
Yep, it's right. It's on the left-hand side. We got a big building now.
Your Quimby's gun store.
Yes.
Keep going north and it's right there, yep.
on the
Past Peace
left-hand side.
Valley, keep going up.
It's right there, Stump Road.
I have seen it, okay.
Or I would say the place that has all the golf carts out front.
Yep.
Right after that.
Right after, it's fabulous.
All right,
We get
can eat
state
and
and
talk.
federal grants
We can eat
typically.
and talk.
Federal grant, okay,
And state.
good.
Stanley?
I just want to make 2 comments on the question. First of all, the first comment is, from what I've read, worldwide, human trafficking has replaced drug trafficking.
Wow.
That's news to me. So I'll have to look
It
into
may not
that.
be, but this is
Yeah.
particular author, a lot of comments. And
Yeah.
as far as the question about security, when I went online, I was no trouble finding a picture of Kristin and Stephanie. I could not find a picture of Jasmine, and it didn't surprise me, because I know that from our experience, there's refuge that they provide, they're kept very secret, so because they don't want somebody showing up.
Let me try to get you guys turkeys. We had a hard time.
Yep.
We couldn't find it.
You need to know somebody.
Because of the experience also that we've had, the question of security, again, the question was asked, how do you take care of yourself? There's another issue of taking care of themselves, and that's the issue of having to deal with this all the time.
Self-care.
And how they mentally take care of themselves. And I have a great deal of admiration for the people that do this all the time. I know that from volunteers, we are constantly being talked to, dealt with because of our emotional involvement. And you imagine what it is for professionals who do this all the time.
So that is something I really hone on, especially with my staff as direct services. You know, we deal with the vicarious trauma. I mean, even though I've been doing this a long time in this field, I hate to say it, like I think some parts I feel desensitized in a way, but there are some cases that still tug on my heartstrings. Like, I'll even give a personal, so we had unfortunately a homicide, and literally was called out. It happened that morning. We were called out at 7:30 in the morning to meet with the family at the police station, and myself and one of my other advocates went out. And I mean, so this woman literally came from finding her husband stabbed by her son, and you know, she's still in the clothing, so there's some blood, you know, and so we're working, we're there for her, but she's not in that frame of mind. So her parents that were there and her two friends, like that's who we're working with, kind of doing that crisis stuff. But her story of what happened and the relationship she had with her husband was almost very similar to what I was dealing with at the time with my ex. So like, did my job, but as soon as I got out to the car, bawled my eyes out. You know, it was like that case hit hard for me because I felt something very similar that she was going through with her husband at the time right before he died. So like, you know, but it's a matter of my staff, we debrief not even for homicides, difficult cases that are going through the court, child cases, we debrief always after court. Homicides, if someone's going out, we debrief right away, whether it's with myself as a coordinator or as a team. We do it at least once a month to talk about difficult cases. We go out for breakfast every once in a while. So, but then the stuff at home of finding stuff that is good for them, you know, of going for a walk. I love cuddling my dogs. My dogs are my therapy, you know, so, but we always focus, and that's with all of our staff, of doing something. We do self-care stuff in the office, you know, and because it's hard, it is hard work, you know, and we hear, especially when we're dealing from the beginning of a case all the way to the end, it's like we're living it with them. You know, it may not have happened directly to us, but we're living it with them. So yeah, self-care, we hone on that tremendously.
And I think too, practicing what we preach about healthy boundaries and healthy relationships and what that looks like. I think sometimes it can be hard not to overly invest in people that you're working with. But I think, you know, we do need to have those kind of professional boundaries, emotional boundaries with each other, just because it's healthy, right? And like really being able to practice that. And I know for us, we're a trauma-informed organization, so we only have a 35-hour work week. We do not encourage overtime. Like we want people to really take the time to decompress and like leave work as much as possible, and have a buffer, you know, an emotional buffer. And we also know that we're human beings, and so I encourage my staff, like, know what will activate you and choose someone else to do that.
Yeah.
There's some of my staff, you know, they won't go and deal with, you know, childhood domestic violence. That's okay. That's gonna activate you, right? We don't always have to be everything for everyone. So knowing our own kind of boundaries and limits.
Yeah. And being able to speak up, I agree with
and
that.
have that team.
Yeah, I've had some of my staff, I was assigned a case and for whatever reason it hit home for them or whatnot, and they're like, I just can't do this one. You're not gonna offend me. Of course I'm gonna reassign that then. So, yeah.
And then just also taking hikes and living in the woods.
Yeah.
That's what I do. Glass of wine. Great.
Glass of wine, yes.
Okay. Well, our official panel is finished, and our goal was simple, to make you aware of abuse, and I hope we accomplished our goal. The goodies are in the other room. Please join us.